Bernard is an MSNBC political analyst. You've gotten to know her over these weeks. She's also president of the Independent Women's Voice. And Michael Spurkanis, another fellow you've gotten to know for a longer period. He's radio talk show host in my home city of Philadelphia. Lady and gentlemen, both of you, your personal reactions on watching this speech. Michelle first.
I think that this is probably the most important speech that I have heard in my lifetime. I would say it is probably the best speech and most important speech on race that we have heard as a nation since Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Every single word was riveting. I thought that the way Barack Obama started off the speech talking about how perfect and how the ideal set forth in our Constitution, but slavery being the original sin of our nation, and how our forefathers left it to further generations to perfect this union, and giving the impression that that time for change is now. I was riveted by his ability in the speech to actually talk about and explain in a manner that is not scary to the nation the type of anger that consumes men like Reverend Jeremiah Wright, and explain it in an important way by talking about what black men in this nation faced in the 50s and in the 60s, and not as a way to get away from the fact that some of the problems that still plague black America need to be fixed within the community. He did a great job, for example, talking about the importance of personal responsibility in the black community, but also balancing that out with saying we need to fix our public education system so that you don't see such a great disparity between black children and white children. I think overall, it ranks right up there as one of the best speeches I've ever heard.
I'm so glad, because as a white American, I'm so glad to hear African Americans have the same emotional reaction to that speech. Michael, what did you feel or think about that speech today?
I was happy to be in the room, and as I was sitting there and I was taking notes, and it was a packed auditorium in Philadelphia at the National Constitution Center, what was running through my mind is, I hope this translates as well on television to the nation at large as it is translating here to this live audience, because like your other guests, I thought it was a stunning speech. And you know what I was looking for? Substance. I didn't want to hear just the grandiose language. I wanted him to distinguish in specific terms his views from those of a man that I think, Chris, is probably a mentor of sorts to him. And for me, the critical language was this. He said, the profound mistake of Reverend Wright's sermons is not that he spoke about racism in our society, it's that he spoke as if our society was static, as if no progress has been made. And then Barack Obama said, essentially, look at me. I'm one of his congregants, and the fact that I am now running for president of the United States and I'm the presumptive Democratic nominee tells you that he's wrong on the merits and that this is a new day for America. And I thought that was a terrific message.
Also, Chris,
You're great, Michael. I completely agree with what you said. Let's all listen now to a bit of the speech. We all should, by the way, at some point after the program, please wait for the end of Hardball at least. But check this out on our website, MSNBC.com. You can watch the whole speech. I think this is the kind of speech I think first graders should see, people in the last year of college should see before they go out in the world. This should be, to me, an American track, something that you just check in with now and then, like reading Great Gatsby and Huckleberry Finn. Read this speech once in a while, ladies and gentlemen. This is us. It's us with the scab ripped off. It's white people talking the way they do when they're alone with other white people, some people. It's black people talking the way they are when there's no white people around. It's an honest statement from a guy who comes from both backgrounds. We have never heard anything like this. Let's take a look. Here is Barack Obama today.
Did I ever hear him make remarks that could be considered controversial while I sat in the church? Yes. Did I strongly disagree with many of his political views? Absolutely. Just as I'm sure many of you have heard remarks from your pastors, priests, or rabbis with which you strongly disagree. But the remarks that have caused this recent firestorm weren't simply controversial. They weren't simply a religious leader's efforts to speak out against perceived injustice. Instead, they expressed a profoundly distorted view of this country.
Let me go to Michael on this. Michael, I thought it was interesting the way he drew the parallel between the offensive words of his pastor, Jeremiah Wright, a man who christened his kids and married him to his wife, Michelle, presided at the marriage, And he drew the comparison to the remarks made by his own white grandmother that in society in which you and I live, a big city particularly, there is racial strife. There is anger on both sides. There are people that get mad at each other in traffic for, obviously, one thing about television, it's pretty clear what we are. I mean, we live with that as a visual visual representatives of our communities, obviously, whether we want to be or not when we get stuck with this situation where we're talking about this. But it seems to be so much of primetime television all the time growing up makes fun of working class whites who are living in changing neighborhoods like my grandparents used to do. My grandfather's a Democratic committee, was the last, he and the other guy next door were the last white guys in the neighborhood. And that's a reality. And you have shows like Archie Bunker where the guy's considered a clown because he has a little attitude about things. Whereas today Barack Obama said, look, racism's off the board. It's not acceptable. But I do understand a guy worried about a neighborhood that's gotten more dangerous. I do worry about, or I understand why a guy might be ticked off. He figures he didn't get a job he should have gotten. It was an understanding from a guy who comes from both backgrounds.
Look, this was the brilliance of his speech. Very early on in the speech today, he used a very important line for a lot of reasons. He said, out of many, we are one. And then he goes on to talk about the fact that he is the son of a black African father from Kenya and the son of a white mother from Kansas. What do we take away from that? Out of many, we are one. He represents the American dream. He represents all of America. I thought he was brilliant in not only talking about the anger and the frustrations of elderly black men, but also talking about the frustrations of many white, working class workers in this country, many of whom he said in his speech might not even ever hear his speech, but it was important because he touched on it, and he's not just saying, let's only focus on the plight of all of America, but let's talk of just black America, but let's talk about the problems of the entire nation because out of many, we are one. And then he says, he went on to say, once we get past this very important discussion, let's sit down and talk about the things that really matter. How do we improve our education system? How do we improve health care? How do we, how do we bring home our soldiers in Iraq? It was brilliant. Even when he talked about conservative principles, you knew who he was reaching out to on the other side of the aisle.
Okay, Michael Crowley, just a thought here. I know you're being a tough political analyst here, and you should be. It seems to me that having captured the African-American vote about 90% recently in Mississippi, he now has to do something he never wanted to do growing up, which is admit or profess the fact that he comes from both backgrounds. Is it politically useful for him to let people know who are white voters, that his mother, his grandmother, half his family, half his background is white?
Sure. There are some silver linings in the fact that, as you say, he got backed into a debate about race he didn't want, although I think he probably knew something